early winter morning in the upper village was still gloomy. Thick fog obscured visibility. People had to walk very close to each other to be seen. The wind rustled through banana leaves, bringing a biting cold that sent shivers down one's spine. It whistled through the old, makeshift doors of temporary stalls, creating creaking sounds that made the space even colder, even gloomier. At that moment, on the village road, two figures trudged silently, their movements hurried. A woman's voice broke the silence. "Is this the entrance to our village, dear? The fog is so thick I can't see anything. I just remember that after passing the market at the village entrance, by this banana grove, it should lead to our house." The person walking beside her, a man, replied, "This is our village. Nothing has changed in years, still as poor as ever. After this banana grove, go straight to the bamboo grove at the end of the village and we'll be home. The village road is still full of potholes. Walk carefully. You're carrying heavy loads, a misstep could easily cripple you." Hearing the man, Nancy hummed in acknowledgement but walked more carefully, paying close attention to the road. As she walked, Nancy suddenly stopped, looking back with a worried expression. Seeing this, Thomas, walking beside her, asked, "What's wrong? Why did you stop walking and look back?" Nancy flinched slightly, turned to Thomas and said, "As I was walking, I kept feeling like someone was watching me. It's really strange." Thomas frowned slightly, snapping gently, "You're only good at imagining things. It's bone-chilling cold and it's only 4 a.m. Who would be following us at this hour? Come on, let's hurry, we're almost home." Hearing her husband, Nancy said nothing more. Her eyes sparkled, filled with happiness, faith, and hope. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept by, making both of them shiver violently. Thomas grumbled, not understanding why such a bone-shaking cold wind blew. Nancy continued to walk silently forward, not saying another word. The two continued straight towards the bamboo grove at the end of the village, where their family and loved ones awaited their return. Behind them, the bamboo lath doors still creaked with each gust of wind. The banana leaves still swayed gently, with the mist slowly drifting with the breeze. It seemed as though, mixed within that mist, faint human-like figures flickered, like shadows, yet also like ethereal smoke, lingering before dissipating. Those two people were Thomas and Nancy. Thomas was the son of Henry and Linda, and Nancy was Henry's eldest daughter-in-law, Thomas's wife. Thomas's house was located at the very end of the village, quite isolated from the other villagers. From Thomas's house to a small hamlet of about 20 families, it was quite a distance. This was because the land where Thomas's family lived was rumored by the villagers to be. People said that long ago, a couple lived happily on this land. Suddenly, one day, the tyrannical local strongman sent men to abduct the husband. A few days later, they carried his body and dumped it in front of the house, then silently left without a word of explanation. The young woman did not cry. She looked at the henchmen with hatred, then single-handedly dragged her husband's body into the house. That night, as the entire village slept soundly, the house at the end of the village burned brightly. People shouted to put out the fire, but it was too late. From within the burning flames came a sound of laughter that was like crying. Since then, every night, people would see a young woman standing, combing her hair amidst the charred remains of the house, now just an empty plot of land. Many elders also recounted hearing her curse that if anyone dared to live there, no one would be allowed to survive. And so, the land was left abandoned. Several nearby houses also couldn't bear it and had to move elsewhere. Only those houses far enough away not to hear or see such horrors could remain. Those were the rumors. Currently living on that land were two families, Thomas's family and Tim's family. Since they moved there, life had been smooth and peaceful, nothing had happened. Henry's and Tim's families were closer than blood relatives, but in truth, having to live on this land was, for both families, a last resort born out of desperation. That story happened when Henry and Tim were still young men, when Thomas had not even formed in his mother's womb. Back then, Henry's family lived at the end of the hamlet, beside a river. His parents built their house facing the river. The river wasn't very wide, only about 30 meters from one bank to the other. Henry's father also built a small wooden dock down to the river's edge for bathing, and next to it was a rather large raft of water spinach that he grew for food. Henry was originally from this area, while his wife, Linda, was a mountain woman. One time, while going up to the forest to saw wood for hire with some young men from the village, the two fell in love and decided to marry. Although Henry's parents seemed displeased, they eventually agreed to their son's wishes. Linda, despite being a mountain girl, was very knowledgeable and quickly learned the customs and lifestyle of the lowlanders. Moreover, she was hardworking and filial to her in-laws, so they grew to love their daughter-in-law more and more. Everyone in the village praised Henry for his keen eye, marrying a woman who was both beautiful in appearance and character. Henry's parents were visibly overjoyed. The family home was always filled with laughter from then on. However, just 1 year after Henry married Linda, disaster struck his family. It was July then, the rainy season, and the river was very high. Never had there been such heavy, prolonged rain as that year. Water from the upstream poured down in torrents, the river turned red, and the water overflowed, flooding their courtyard. That day, Henry and Linda had gone to the neighboring village early in the morning to work for a wealthy family. They didn't return home until late evening. At that time, a storm suddenly brewed, signaling another heavy rain was coming. Arriving home, both Henry and Linda found it strange. Normally, by this time, his parents would be sitting in front of the oil lamp, dinner already laid out, just waiting for the couple to eat. But today, the house was dark, and despite calling repeatedly, there was no answer. The couple searched everywhere but couldn't find his parents. It began to rain. Henry thought of going to a neighbor's house to see if his parents were visiting there, but the rain grew heavier and heavier. The storm raged wildly, forcing the couple to wait for the rain to subside before searching. Reassuring himself, Henry considered the possibility that his parents had gone to a neighbor's house to visit and were staying there because of the heavy rain. 2 hours later, the rain completely stopped. After waiting for a long time, his parents still hadn't returned. Henry's heart began to burn with anxiety. He ran to every house in the hamlet but found nothing. Sensing something bad had happened, he went to the riverbank in front of his house, where his father had placed several large stones as steps to go down to the river to bathe. They were now submerged because the river had risen too high, level with the topmost step. It was dark. Henry tried to hold a flashlight in his hand, sweeping it back and forth around the garden, then shining it out over the river. Suddenly, he stopped at a large, round, dark object bobbing in the middle of the water spinach raft. Looking closer, he recognized it as his family's round basket boat, which his father usually used to paddle out to the raft to pick vegetables or cast nets for fish. Realizing the boat was empty, his heart beat faster. He felt bewildered and fearful, guessing the worst might have happened. Normally, after use, his father would store the boat behind the house and only bring it out when needed. Never before had he seen his father leave the boat on the water spinach raft, as his father was very careful by nature. Without hesitation, Henry immediately jumped into the river and swam towards the boat. The distance between the raft and the bank was not too far. Although the current was swift, being a young man who had lived by the river for many years, he was strong enough to swim out safely. Reaching the boat, he saw a few fish, some water spinach, and his mother's sandals inside. Henry was stunned. He cried out for his parents, sobbing like a child. His voice echoed along the river. Inside the house, Linda heard her husband's cries and knew something was wrong, so she ran out. When she arrived, she saw Henry paddling the boat back to shore. He looked at his wife, his eyes red and swollen, 2 streams of tears flowing down his face in despair. Kneeling on the ground, he blamed himself for not taking good care of his parents. 3 days later, the bodies of his parents were found about 2 kilometers from home. In the final moments of their lives, the couple were still embracing each other tightly. Many people were heartbroken by the sight, but for those with a faint heart, it was a terrifying experience. The bodies of the couple were bloated, their faces pale. What frightened people even more was that neither of them had closed their eyes in death. Their eyes were still wide open. It seemed they had encountered something truly horrible before they died. That fear seemed to still linger in their eyes, even though their bodies had been submerged for 3 days. In the days that followed, Henry still couldn't understand his parents' death. His father had just turned 50, his health was still quite robust and strong, no less than a young man. He had grown up with this river. His father had even saved several drowning people, once pulling a man weighing 70 kilograms to shore. Yet his mother, a petite woman weighing only about 40 kilograms, was swept away by the water with his father, and they died embracing each other. Another strange thing was that he had never seen his father allow his mother to get into the basket boat on the river, even when accompanied by him, because she was a mountain woman, having grown up with mountains and forests, not understanding rivers and water. Yet on that fateful day, he allowed her to get into the basket boat with him on the river. It was also during a storm, with high water, yet the boat didn't even capsize. Still, the couple had drowned in the cold river, and no logical explanation could be found. Henry suddenly recalled a story from years ago. He was a 16-year-old boy then. It was dusk as his family began to prepare dinner when an old beggar woman appeared outside the alley, leaning on a stick, dressed in torn clothes, wearing a conical hat, slowly approaching the front door of their house. The old woman kept her head bowed, her hat covering her entire face, making it impossible to see. She came forward, extended her bowl, and whispered, "Please, give this old woman a bowl of rice. I haven't eaten anything for days. Please be charitable, I'm so hungry." Henry's parents were naturally kind-hearted people, so as soon as the old woman finished speaking, his mother immediately scooped a hot bowl of rice, added a few fish and some vegetables, and brought it out to her. "Here, our family doesn't have much, just this much. Please sit down and eat, madam. Eat until you're full. If it's not enough, I'll serve you more." His mother politely offered the bowl of rice to the old woman. The beggar woman took the bowl of rice, her eyes darting towards the dinner table where Henry and his father were also sitting. There wasn't much rice in the pot. 3 people eating would likely still be hungry. On the table were only a few small fish and some boiled water spinach. The beggar woman must have been very hungry because in a flash, the full bowl of rice was empty. Both his parents and Henry were astonished. Even if she was hungry, she couldn't have eaten that fast. Seeing the old woman eat so quickly, and thinking she was still hungry, Henry's mother was about to take the rice bowl to get her more, but the old woman waved her hand. The old woman smiled slightly at his mother with kind eyes, but immediately after, she adopted a serious expression and said, "Seeing your family's kindness, this old woman wishes to give you a piece of advice. Because you are good people, consider this your last chance." Hearing this, Henry's mother looked a little surprised, her eyes somewhat bewildered. "Yes, madam, please tell us whatever you have to teach. We will listen." The beggar woman shook her head slightly and said, "The land your family lives on has a lot of yin energy, accumulated over hundreds of years. This place was once where the dead were buried, generals who served the country. When your ancestors moved here and started their lives, they noticed the presence of the wandering souls here. If they had built a shrine and offered incense to worship them, perhaps nothing would have happened. But your family did the opposite, even suppressing this land, trapping them for many years, leaving them hungry, thirsty, and cold. Now, this old woman sees that the suppressing charm is about to lose its effect. When that happens, they will take revenge on your family because you are the descendants of those who suppressed them. The sins of the father are visited upon the children. The karma created by ancestors is borne by descendants. It's too late to do anything now. There is only one way: you must leave this place. This land cannot be inhabited. Otherwise, your family will face great calamity." After hearing this, Henry's mother's face clearly showed confusion and worry. Although she didn't fully understand the old woman's words, she began to tremble, looking inside the house at his father with fear. Henry and his father had been sitting inside the house, witnessing the entire conversation. With a displeased and rather annoyed expression, his father scolded the old woman. "Look here, old woman, you came here hungry to beg for food from our family. We ourselves are short of food but didn't begrudge you. After we fed you, you cursed our house with misfortune, slandered our ancestors, and now you're telling us to abandon the land left by our ancestors. What do you mean?" The beggar woman stood still, as if wanting to say something, but his father immediately spoke up. All right, you've eaten, so please leave. Don't come back here again. You should use those nonsensical stories to scare children. They might fall for it, but I don't believe in the ghost stories you tell. Our family has lived here peacefully and happily for so long. Nothing has ever happened, so please leave immediately." The beggar woman said nothing more this time. She turned and walked away, mumbling, her conical hat swaying back and forth. What a pity, what a pity. The old woman left, but Henry's mother was still haunted by her somewhat eerie words. Henry's father appeared very calm. He reassured his wife, "I absolutely detest people who try to scare others with ghosts. I've never believed in ghosts in this world. I'll only believe it when I see one. Besides, the old woman is old, she's poor and lacks food and a place to sleep. She's probably developed some dementia and is talking nonsense." Have you seen anything happen to our family in all these generations living here? Don't think silly thoughts and get so scared you lose sleep and appetite. Indeed, doing good leads to trouble sometimes. Henry's mother listened to her husband and thought it made sense. For years, their family had lived peacefully. Generations of Henry's family had lived on this land. Though not wealthy, they were always well-fed and happy. This incident gradually faded into oblivion as, in the following years, his family continued to live happily on that land, and no one ever saw the beggar woman again. There was one thing that Henry always pondered and never found an answer to. That day, when the beggar woman left their gate, he didn't know why he was curious to see if she would lift her head or remove her hat when she went out onto the road. Because if she kept bowing her head like that, how could she walk? The old woman's shadow had just disappeared behind the bamboo gate when he ran to the very edge of the gate. Standing inside, he gently poked his head out to look down the alley, but there was absolutely no sign of the old woman. She had vanished from his sight. How could she have walked so fast? His house was at the very end of the alley. Beyond his house was the river. The distance from his house to the fork leading to other houses was quite long. Even a strong young man running at full speed couldn't disappear so quickly, let alone an old beggar woman leaning on a stick, taking heavy steps, and the road was open, with no place to hide. He couldn't explain the strange incident he had witnessed with his own eyes. He also didn't tell his parents for fear that his father would scold him. The next day, he asked his friends in the hamlet about the beggar woman to see if she had visited anyone else's house or if anyone had seen her, but everyone shook their heads. No beggar woman had entered their houses. And yesterday, they had gathered at the beginning of the alley playing all evening and hadn't seen any beggar woman pass by. So many confused thoughts ran through his head that he couldn't explain. His house was deep in the alley. If the beggar woman had entered the alley, she should have gone to the houses at the outer part of the hamlet first. Why did she only go to his house? And all his friends playing at the beginning of the alley hadn't seen the old woman. At that time, he pondered, trying every way to explain the event, but no matter what, he couldn't find a reason. Gradually, he no longer cared about it. Several years after the encounter, his family continued to be happy and joyful. He married a gentle and kind wife. Everything remained normal until today, when both his parents passed away mysteriously at the same time. He suddenly recalled the story of the beggar woman and shivered with fear. It seemed he had somewhat found an answer. He could confirm that she was definitely not human. Some time after Henry's parents passed away, for some unknown reason, the land of his house, which was originally on a rise, began to erode into the river after a period of heavy rain. One morning, as Henry and Linda were still asleep, there was a rumbling sound. It was the sound of earth collapsing into the river, but this time it seemed to be a very large section. The couple ran out in a panic, and half of their garden land had already flowed into the river. But even more horrifying, after the landslide, several stone tombs were revealed. All the gravestones were still intact, with carvings on them. The couple was extremely frightened and worried, wondering how many more such tombs might be hidden deeper inside their house. So, for a long time, their family had been living on top of the dead. He recounted the story to Linda. After hearing it, Linda's face turned pale with fear. So the couple decided to move elsewhere, leaving behind the land of their ancestors. The place Henry chose was the land at the end of the village, near the main road, quite spacious. In front were several large bamboo groves where people often sat to avoid the sun when going to work in the fields. During the day, it was an ideal place for people to gather because it was very cool, even a little chilly. However, that was only during the day. At night, absolutely no one dared to approach it. People still rumored that the abandoned land at the end of the village harbored restless spirits. Every night from around 12 a.m. to 4 a.m., if anyone passed by, they would see, in the middle of the overgrown bushes in the field, the figure of a girl dressed in white, with long hair reaching her heels, standing there, combing her hair, laughing and crying in a terrifying manner. Such stories were passed from person to person, so no one dared to live there. Despite the land being in a beautiful location, close to the main road, suitable for business and trade, even a wealthy man in the village once considered leveling the land to make a resting place for passers-by. But every time he hired people to clear the trees and tidy up, misfortune would strike. A few workers had only chopped down one or two small trees when, for some unknown reason, they chopped their own feet with their knives. Worse, one even chopped the back of the person working in front of him. Several women hired to clear weeds, while working diligently, suddenly saw a pure white snake with a crimson head like a rooster's comb, its eyes like two glowing coals, slowly raise its head, flare its hood, stare intently at each person, and hiss fiercely several times. Seeing this, the women screamed, dropped their knives and sickles, and ran for their lives, not even bothering to collect their wages. After that incident, several women from the weed-clearing team suddenly developed fevers and were ill for several days. From then on, the land was abandoned, and no one paid it any mind. The authorities announced they would grant it free to anyone who wanted to live there, but after many years, it remained deserted, the scenery becoming even more desolate and chilling. Many villagers who passed by around 1 a.m. witnessed the girl standing there combing her hair. But she absolutely never harmed anyone who did not trespass on that land. At first, Linda was terrified. She was horrified when Henry told her the family would move to the land at the end of the village. Even though Linda had only recently come to the village as a bride, everyone knew the rumors about that land. Linda worriedly asked her husband, "Why don't we ask for another place? There's plenty of land in this village, why that particular spot? So many people have tried to live there, but the ghost wouldn't let them. How can we live there, dear?" Henry looked at his wife with a sad gaze. He was born and raised on this land and was no stranger to the ghost stories woven by the villagers. However, just a few days ago, Linda had told him that she was pregnant. Currently, they had no money. He understood that he had to provide a home for his wife and child. Only with a stable home could they build a stable life, and Linda and their child would suffer less. If they left the village now, the entire family would surely wander the streets and markets. The land left by his ancestors could certainly not be lived on anymore. The beggar woman's warning from long ago had now come true. Moreover, the land had now eroded close to their courtyard. Soon, the house would likely be at the bottom of the murky river. After a moment of thought, he gently said, "I also spoke with the authorities and explained everything, but they wouldn't allow it. They said that land is in a good location, suitable for business. It's conveniently located near the main road, and in the future, if the state builds an interprovincial road through it, we'll be able to make a lot of money. I know they're just making excuses. Right now, we're asking for land for free, so we take what they give us. We'll find a place to build a temporary house, and after some time, when we have money, we'll move elsewhere." Suddenly thinking of something, he exclaimed, "Oh no, I completely forgot. Don't worry, it's not just our family moving there this time. This morning, I met a couple from afar. They said their hometown was swept away by floods, so they've been wandering everywhere, begging to survive. When they arrived here, villagers told them about the abandoned land, so they asked the authorities for a place to build a small house for shelter from the rain and sun. So the authorities divided the land in half, one half for our family and one half for them." Linda felt reassured hearing Henry, because now they would have neighbors, at least they wouldn't be alone on the desolate land. She sighed. "It's true that many people have hard lives. They're in the same situation as us, with no other choice but to live on that land. Do you know where they're from?" Henry saw his wife was less tense and happily recounted. "I asked, and he said his name is Tim, from far away in the central region." Knowing they would be neighbors, he seemed quite happy, thinking they could help each other in times of need. After talking for a while, I told him about the ghost there. He told me not to worry. His father used to be a shaman, and he learned a little, so he assured me he could handle it. Upon hearing this, Linda also felt more relieved. She was once a girl from the mountains and had witnessed many shamanic rituals to banish ghosts. She still believed in ghosts, but also believed there were masters who could deal with them. For some reason, even though she hadn't met her new neighbor, she had faith that he could do it, and she could live peacefully on that land. The next morning, the authorities brought both families out to divide the land. This abandoned land was quite spacious. Divided in half, there was still plenty of room to build a large house and a yard for gardening in front. After measuring and marking the boundaries, the authorities left, leaving the two families. They stood looking at each other, smiling happily. Joy and hope radiated from each person's face. Henry spoke first. "Hello, I'm Henry, 30 years old this year, and this is my wife. Her name is Linda, she's 29. In response, the husband from the other side also spoke. "Please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Tim, 28 years old, and my wife's name is Mary, 26 years old. We're from the central region. Our houses were swept away by floods, so we've wandered here, hoping for your help." Henry smiled brightly and said, "Then I'm 2 years older than you, Tim, so I'll be the elder brother. From now on, we are brothers and neighbors. We'll help each other." The two men shook hands and smiled happily. Henry turned to the two women and said, "You two ladies get acquainted, please. Tim and I are going to plan how to clear this place." The two men walked, pointing and discussing in the middle of the empty land. In their enthusiastic discussion, Tim suddenly stopped abruptly, looking into the bushes, a hint of fear in his eyes. In the large bush in the center, a large incense burner was placed on a small mound of earth. Beside it, the faint outline of a girl in white clothes, with long hair reaching her heels, shimmered like smoke, staring intently at the two men. It seemed the ghost realized Tim could see her, so she turned her face directly towards him and smiled faintly. Her eyes, opaque and white, faded away and disappeared. After a moment of panic, Tim regained his composure. Seeing Tim's slight bewilderment, Henry clapped him on the shoulder and asked, "What's wrong with you? We were talking, I asked you a few questions, and you didn't answer, just stared into that place like you'd lost your soul." Startled by Henry's pat on the shoulder, Tim flinched. Seeing Tim's strange behavior, Henry looked towards where Tim had been staring. A chill ran through him as he noticed the incense burner on the mound of earth seemed to be smoking, even though no incense sticks were lit there. Tim now looked at Henry. The two exchanged glances, as if understanding each other. They both turned to look at their wives, who were still chattering away animatedly as if they had known each other for a long time. The two men were very happy to see this. Suddenly, after their misfortunes, the two struggling families met and would now strive together. Tim spoke up, "In my opinion, let's put everything aside today. We shouldn't discuss moving into this land yet. We must first ask permission from the owner of this place." Hearing Tim, Henry didn't understand, as hadn't the authorities already given them legal ownership. Seeing Henry's questioning gaze, Tim raised a hand to his mouth, signaling silence, telling Henry not to ask any more questions. Suddenly understanding, Henry nodded and quietly walked away. That evening, Henry and Linda invited Tim and Mary to stay temporarily at their current house. The two families would stay there for a few days before building their new homes. The two families gathered around a simple dinner table. Late in the evening, the two women went to sleep. Henry still sat on the porch, reminiscing about the peaceful and happy days there. Yet, in an instant, he had lost everything. His parents, and soon, this house would also disappear. No one would remember that a happy home once stood here. A look of sadness clearly showed on his face. Tim, inside the house, saw Henry still awake and deep in thought, so he went outside. Henry heard footsteps and turned around, suddenly remembering the events of the day. He immediately asked, "What happened this morning that made you look so serious? You even gestured for me not to speak, but when I stepped onto that plot of land, I had such an eerie feeling." Tim then slowly replied, "Actually, when we entered the boundary of the land, I saw a girl in white clothes, with hair long enough to reach her heels, standing behind some bushes, staring at us. Seeing that, I knew this was the spirit of the girl the villagers often talked about. Her eyes were not very friendly. It seemed she didn't want us to live on that land." Henry asked worriedly, "So what do we do now? Are we really forced to leave this land?" He continued, "Many people wanted this land before because it's good land, in a convenient location, but every time something happened. I'm afraid the same will happen to us." Tim looked at Henry with confidence and said, "Don't worry, brother, I'll take care of this. We're not going anywhere. I have a way. I'm sure she won't bother our two families, just trust me." The next morning, Tim asked Henry and Linda to buy some rooster's blood and the blood of a black dog. Then Tim spent the entire day alone in his room, doing something no one knew. When Henry asked, he only said that he was sitting and writing down the incantations for appeasing spirits that his father had taught him long ago. He explained that if the ritual was performed incorrectly, the spirits wouldn't accept it and would continue to cause trouble, preventing the two families from living there. A few days later, at dusk, the villagers of the upper hamlet were again abuzz. In the very center of the abandoned land at the end of the village, candles were lit in a circular bagua pattern with an altar and a young man in the middle. That young man was Tim. He was ringing a bell, mumbling indistinct words. Incense smoke billowed, making the atmosphere eerie. Curious villagers gathered to watch. After Tim completed the ritual, he held up a porcelain jar, covered with yellow talismans. He mumbled, then covered the jar, sealing the lid with a talisman that appeared to be written in blood. When he was done, Tim went to a small hole that had been prepared beforehand, buried the jar, and covered it up. Watching Tim perform the ritual, Linda whispered to Henry, "Dear, this ritual looks like the soul-imprisoning ritual from my hometown long ago. They catch and trap the ghost in a jar and bury it. That way, the spirit is confined and can no longer harm the living. But if the ghost escapes, its revenge is terrifying." Hearing Linda, Henry immediately explained, "It's not like that. Tim told me he was just asking the spirit for permission for our two families to live here, and then we'll build a small shrine and offer incense regularly. And that jar is to be buried between our two plots of land to prevent outside evil spirits from causing trouble." After Tim completed the ritual, the two families began to clear the overgrown bushes. Curious villagers stood by, waiting to see if the strange events of the past would reoccur, but absolutely nothing unusual happened. The two families continued their clearing work smoothly. By late afternoon, the work was largely done. All four people were visibly happy, as everything had gone smoothly. At this rate, by tomorrow they could start building their houses and would soon have new homes in a prime location. Work proceeded peacefully. A few days later, villagers saw two thatched houses erected in the middle of the abandoned land. Between the two houses was a small shrine. Life for the two families then passed peacefully. Less than a year later, Linda gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Thomas. With a new member, both families were filled with laughter. Their joy doubled when, a year later, Mary, Tim's wife, also gave birth to a son, whom they named Ted. The two families and their two children went through the years, loving, protecting, and helping each other. Time flew by, and in a flash, Thomas and Ted were also in their late teens. Although their families were poor, both were healthy, tall, and robust. They were also known for being diligent, hardworking, and well-behaved, so everyone in the neighborhood loved them. It was no wonder that several villagers with daughters wanted to marry them off to the two boys. A few years later, both Thomas and Ted were married. Thomas married Nancy, a girl from the lower hamlet. From childhood, Nancy's family, though not wealthy, had enough to eat and wear. As the youngest daughter, she was doted on by her parents more than her siblings. Nancy was well-behaved and greatly admired by the neighbors for her exceptionally skillful way of speaking and behaving. Although she didn't have to work hard in the fields, she was diligent at home with sewing and embroidery. Nancy's embroidery skills were quite renowned in the region. Thomas loved Nancy not only for her talent in embroidery, but also for her voice, which sounded like honey poured into his ears. Ted married Holly. Holly's family was poor, not as well off as Nancy's. Her father had passed away early, and her mother was sickly and bedridden, so Holly alone had to both earn money for meals and pay for her mother's treatment. Because of this, she looked dark-skinned and gaunt. Ted also loved Holly, seeing her as a good girl, filial to her parents, and accepted marrying her to help care for her elderly mother. Henry's and Tim's families had always lived together like blood siblings, so Thomas and Ted grew up together, considering each other as brothers. That's why both weddings were held on the same day. Everyone in the village admired the strong bond between the two families and rejoiced for them after so many years of sorrow. Now their children had grown up, and they were finally enjoying the fruits of their labor. But only a few months after the weddings, a crisis struck all the people in the region. It was around the 8th lunar month. It rained for a solid month without stopping. The entire upper village was now submerged in a sea of water. Crops rotted away. All the crops in the fields and gardens were swept away by the current. In September, the rain had somewhat subsided, but every time the water receded a little, a few days later there would be another heavy downpour, and the water level would rise back to its original height. Thus, September ended, and after 2 months, the entire village was still submerged in water. Their reserved rice gradually ran out. Young, strong men in the village also left to seek work elsewhere to buy rice to feed their families. Ted saw that the rice in his house was almost gone. He figured that if they stayed home, in just a few weeks, the whole family would face starvation. Ted immediately went to meet Thomas, inviting him to the district town to find extra work. So, the next day, both of them went to the district to look for jobs. They wandered around for a long time but couldn't find any work because of the floods. People had no jobs, so they flocked to the district to work for hire. Everywhere they went, people were looking for work. Many even sought jobs just for a meal, not even needing a salary. Thomas and Ted, however, absolutely had to find a paying job to buy rice to feed their families, because both of them understood that, at this time, their parents and wives at home were completely relying on them. They walked all morning, tired and hungry. The two sat down to rest under a tree by the road. As their eyes were half closed, both suddenly flinched when someone called out right in front of them. "Hey, you two, where are you going, sleeping here like this?" The two opened their eyes to see a fat, bald man with tattoos of birds and wild animals all over his arms and legs. He looked them up and down, then asked with a jerk of his chin, "You two looking for work, aren't you?" Hearing the fat man, Thomas quickly replied, "Yes, we're looking for work, but we haven't found anything." The fat man smiled, scrutinizing the two, then said, "Then you two come with me. Easy work, high pay. I'll cover your food and lodging and give each of you 500,000 VND a month. Do you agree?" Thomas and Ted couldn't believe the fat man's words. Covered food and lodging, and a whole 500,000 VND. With the current price of rice, just 1 month's work could buy 100 kilograms of rice for the whole family, no longer fearing hunger. Ted seemed not to fully believe it, so he asked again more carefully in a timid voice. What did you say, sir? Food and lodging covered and 500,000 VND a month? Is that true? And what kind of work pays so much, sir?" The fat man chuckled heartily, rubbing his shiny, bald head, and said in a booming voice, "Don't you worry, lads, easy work, high pay. You just need to follow my instructions. Whatever I tell you to do, you do exactly as I say." With such a generous salary, there was no need to hesitate further, and no need to ask what the work was. The two accepted the fat man's offer. Fearing that asking too many questions might make the man change his mind and lose out on such a lucrative job, the two followed him to the work area. That fat man was no stranger to the people of this area. He was the boss, the ringleader of a gambling syndicate, a loan shark, and his main business was illegal goods. His syndicate was the largest in the area. He had a lot of money and connections, so no one dared to cross him. Even some officials sometimes had to show him a certain degree of respect. Today, by chance, he was passing by where Thomas and Ted were resting, and he guessed that these two young men were from the countryside looking for work. Seeing that both were bright-faced, tall, and robust, he immediately had the idea of taking them to work for him. With his keen eye for people, he was sure that these two would be quite effective workers. Stopping at the end of an alley, he told the two to wait, then approached a room with an old but sturdy corrugated iron door. He raised his hand and pounded on the door. The loud noise made Thomas and Ted jump. As he knocked, he called out in a booming voice, open up, he called out bluntly, not even clearly addressing anyone. A moment later, the door creaked open, revealing 3 rather tall young men, also covered in various tattoos. They respectfully opened the door for the fat man and then moved aside. The fat man looked around the rented room for a moment, then said to his 3 henchmen, "These are the 2 new guys I just hired. From now on, they'll live here with you 3. Tonight, you'll show them how to deliver goods." The 3 men assented and nodded profusely. The fat man stepped back out. As he passed Thomas and Ted, he patted their shoulders and said, "The work here requires you guys to be quick and familiar with the routes. If there's anything you don't know or understand, ask those guys, they'll show you. Do well, and there will be extra bonuses." With that, he walked away, a smug smile on his face. Thomas and Ted received enthusiastic help from the 3 henchmen. That evening, one of the 3 gave them new sets of clothes, saying the boss provided them. The 2 outfits looked very luxurious and expensive. Both were delighted, seeing the boss's care and thoughtfulness. When it was time to work that evening, Thomas and Ted were given specific instructions by one of the henchmen. The work was indeed very light, so light that they themselves never dared to dream of it. They only had to receive goods and deliver them to the correct addresses. They only had to make a few deliveries a day, and then they were free to do whatever they wanted. Thomas and Ted sometimes wondered to the other guys working with them, who only said that the boss's goods were all high-value items, and he had to trust them very much to entrust them with such tasks. That's why even though they worked little, they earned high salaries. From then on, the 2 officially started working for the fat man. After a month, seeing that the work was so easy, the income high, and everything went smoothly, the fat man paid their salary exactly as promised, even giving bonuses. Thomas and Ted were overjoyed, bringing money home to buy rice for their families. At home, no one understood what Thomas and Ted were doing that they could earn so much money in just 1 month in the district, while many others from the village who went to the district to work only earned enough for meager meals. Henry and Linda asked a couple of times, but Thomas only said that they were lucky to meet a good, kind boss, and the job was just daily deliveries. Several months later, Thomas and Ted's work continued as before, without any incident. Both were good workers, so the fat man also gave them generous raises. Day by day, both earned his favor. He arranged for Thomas and Ted to live in his compound permanently, for convenience in handling deliveries that required quicker men. One time, Thomas walked past the fat man's room and accidentally overheard him whispering with his trusted disciple. On the table was a piece of paper with something written on it. The two were engrossed in their discussion and didn't notice Thomas's presence. The fat man's voice exclaimed, "It definitely has to be done, but let's be patient. After this batch, I'll take both Thomas and Ted up there. Digging requires strong, hardworking men to get the job done. If successful, we'll surely be rich." The two continued to whisper very softly. Outside, Thomas slowly recalled the locations the fat man and his disciple had just mentioned. Thomas took out a pen and paper, wrote them down, then hid them in a secret place. A few days later, Thomas requested leave to return home. The fat man was a bit surprised, but Thomas said he had family matters to resolve and would return to work afterward. Seeing this, the fat man didn't suspect anything. He paid Thomas his full wages. Upon arriving home, after greeting his parents, Thomas slipped into the room with Nancy. Henry noticed Thomas's shifty eyes and found it strange, as Thomas had never looked like that since childhood. Since Thomas went to the district and earned a lot of money to support the family, Henry had noticed Thomas had changed somewhat. Thomas seemed less talkative, more withdrawn, and his eyes had a strange look. Knowing this, but Thomas was always respectful and worried about his family, so Henry remained silent. Upon entering the room, Nancy asked loudly, "What's wrong? You seem so secretive. Did you get another raise?" Thomas put a finger to his lips, signaling Nancy to speak more softly. Thomas then recounted the conversation he had overheard to Nancy and explained his intentions. Nancy's eyes lit up, clearly showing joy. Nancy whispered in Thomas's ear, "Go for it, dear, you absolutely must go. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, a chance for us to change our lives." The fat man, as you said, still has to deal with several more shipments before he brings people there to search. Let's go now. If we return within a few months, we surely won't encounter them. Nancy's words were nothing short of urging, strengthening Thomas's resolve to go look for gold. Thomas slammed his hand on the bed frame and declared, "I'll make a list of everything we need for this trip. Tomorrow morning, you and I will go to the market to buy them. I've saved a little money, but it probably won't be enough. You go to the district and sell the necklace your parents gave you as a dowry to cover travel expenses. We can buy it back later when we have money." Nancy didn't hesitate for a moment, even though it was the dowry her parents had carefully given her as a memento when she got married. Thomas lay with his arm over his forehead, contemplating his plans for the trip. It could transform him into a rich man, just as the fat man had said. As he was dozing off, Thomas suddenly flinched, hearing Nancy's call. "Honey, honey, I want to tell you something. What is it that you're calling so urgently?" His train of thought interrupted, Thomas snapped gently. Nancy cautiously continued, "Since you and Ted work together and have been close for so long, are you going to invite him to join us on this trip?" Thomas sighed and said, "The other day I called and told him I had a business opportunity far away, but I didn't specify it was to look for gold. I invited him and Holly to come along, but he refused. He said the pay where he was working was decent. Plus, he also found Holly a job at a nearby restaurant, so both of them are working and won't be able to join us." Nancy let out a sigh, but it wasn't a sigh of sadness or disappointment. It was a sigh of relief. True to their plan, the very next day, Thomas and Nancy packed up and set off for distant work. Thomas bought enough rice for his parents to eat for a while and left them some money for emergencies. Then the couple bid farewell to their parents and left for distant lands, carrying the dream of changing their lives. His parents watched their son and daughter-in-law's figures disappear, their eyes welling up with tears. They wondered when their children would return. With only one son, now that he was gone, only the two of them were left to care for each other. His parents were about to turn back into the house when, from the other side, Tim called out, "Henry, Henry, Thomas and Nancy, they've gone off to the border to trade, haven't they?" Henry replied sadly, "Yes, they just left, Tim. They intended to come over and say goodbye, but they saw your door wasn't open, afraid to disturb your sleep, so they left." Tim smiled and said, "Yesterday, they came over to say goodbye to me and Mary. Well, from tomorrow on, our two families will cook and eat together again, just like before, to make it cozier." Ted and Holly also went to the district this morning. Ted found Holly a job near where he works, so all the young ones have left and it's just us old folks left. Henry also spoke up to encourage everyone. "Yes, well, our children are grown, they think about their future. They've gone far away to build their lives. Later, we must live happily and healthily so they can work with peace of mind." Linda said in a choked voice, "If only our two children worked nearby like Ted and Holly, then they could visit home occasionally. But Thomas and Nancy have gone all the way to the border, hundreds of kilometers away. Who knows when we'll see them again?" As Linda spoke, two streams of tears fell. Henry comforted his wife. "Why are you crying, dear? Didn't you hear them say? If work goes well, they'll be back for good in 5 or 6 months. Crying like this won't bring them good luck in their work." So from that moment on, the four of them cooked together again, reliving their younger years. The first few years, the two families had moved to the abandoned land at the end of the village to live. Time flew by. Before leaving, Thomas promised his parents he would return in 5 or 6 months. Yet today, when Thomas and Nancy returned, it had been exactly 10 years. 10 years had passed. He wondered if his parents were still healthy. Thomas quickened his pace. Ahead, he could already see the bamboo grove in front of their alley. Arriving there, he stepped in and opened the gate. The scenery was still the same. Although he had been gone for 10 years, this place seemed to have changed nothing. In fact, the landscape looked even older and more desolate. Tim's house was also enveloped in a hazy white mist, looking much colder and gloomier than before. Suddenly, Thomas shivered slightly as he looked closely at the house. Thomas stepped into the courtyard, when suddenly, both Thomas and Nancy jumped when a pitch-black animal darted out from behind the kitchen, pouncing on Nancy's legs. Startled, Nancy screamed loudly, kicking it away. It yelped once, then ran straight to the front door of the house, barking mournfully, like a dog barking at ghosts, so chilling it gave goosebumps. It was the dog that Henry and Linda had bought with the money Thomas left after he and Nancy went away to work, to guard the house and keep them company. Woken from sleep by the ink's mournful, piercing barks, both Henry and Linda were awake but lay silently listening. Linda whispered in her husband's ear, "It's strange, isn't it? For the past few days at this time, Ink has been barking mournfully as if seeing a ghost. 2 nights ago at this very hour, it barked a few times too. I found it strange, so I went out to see if anything was there. And do you know, dear, I saw a huge owl on Tim's roof, its eyes glowing red. It stood by Tim's house but kept looking at ours. It just stared at me. I was so scared. I ran inside and locked the door tight. I was so scared, dear." Hearing Linda's words, Henry was not surprised at all. Because just last night, he himself had witnessed that terrifying sight, but it was even more horrifying. It was still Ink's long, mournful barks, still the owl on Tim's rooftop, but it wasn't just one. In the thick fog, he couldn't make out what kind of creature it was, but he clearly saw 4 glowing red eyes vaguely flying above Tim's thatched roof, seemingly staring straight into his eyes. Overwhelmed with fear, his mouth was agape, unable to utter a word. Then, regaining his composure, he trembled, his legs shaking, as he stumbled back into the house and slammed the door shut. He was certain that the owl perched on Tim's house was an ill omen, and even more certain that something bad was about to happen to Tim's family. Thinking this, the very next day he intended to go talk to Tim and Mary, but he didn't know where they had gone early that morning. They only returned at 10 p.m. last night. Seeing it was late, he didn't feel it was appropriate to go over, intending to go tell them this morning. Henry was deep in thought when Linda's whisper again reached his ears. Normally, it only barks once or twice and then stops. Why is it barking continuously today and howling so piercingly? It sounds terrifying. Henry was still trying to listen intently. He clearly heard footsteps approaching. He told Linda to be silent. The dog also stopped barking. Suddenly, it whined softly, then ran behind the kitchen, sitting there, staring straight at Thomas and Nancy. Henry, lying inside, clearly heard people talking, voices that sounded quite familiar. A moment later, he heard a call. "Father, mother, please open the door for us." Henry had been listening intently and now recognized it. Although the voice had changed a little, he still recognized his son's voice. He exclaimed to Linda, "It's Thomas's voice, it's Thomas. Wife Thomas is back." Hearing Henry, Linda didn't ask anything further, running straight to the door. As she pulled the door bar open, before her stood two shadowy figures with long hair completely covering their faces, right on the doorstep. Linda screamed and collapsed to the ground, unconscious. The two dark figures rushed into the house, running to support Linda. "Mother, what's wrong? Mother, wake up, it's me, Thomas. My wife and I have returned." Henry stumbled out, still holding the oil lamp. The lamplight shone clearly on the faces of the two people supporting Linda. Thomas stood up and embraced Henry tightly. "Father, my wife and I have returned. I'm sorry for all the hardships you've endured all these years. Are you and Mother well?" Henry hugged his son tightly, patted his back, and choked up. "Your parents are still good, healthy. It's good, it's good, it's good you're back." Nancy was still supporting Linda. After a while, she regained consciousness. Seeing her open her eyes, Nancy urgently called out, "Thomas, Mother's awake?" Then Nancy helped Linda sit up, taking her hand. "Mother, it's me, Nancy. Thomas and I have returned." Linda then composed herself, looking closely at the faces of the two holding her hand. She embraced Nancy, crying and speaking with joy. "Thank heavens, my son and daughter-in-law are back. Thank heavens for protecting them and bringing them home safely." Then she held Thomas's hand, scolding him emotionally. "You rascal, where have you been all these years? Not coming home? Your old parents here thought something had happened to you." Then she cried again. These were the happy tears of a mother reunited with her children after 10 years of separation. Seeing this, Henry immediately told Linda, all right, stop carrying on. Our children are home, what else could happen? Let them change clothes and rest. We can talk as much as you want tomorrow morning." Linda immediately bustled into the small chest, pulled out some clothes, and said, "These are the clothes you two left behind. I've kept them. It's been 10 years. I don't know if they'll still fit, but your clothes are dirty. You two wear these for now and rest so you're less tired. We'll figure things out tomorrow." Thomas and Nancy assented and went into the bedroom. It had been 10 years since they returned to their old house. Thomas and Nancy were now actually considered among the wealthiest in this region. The two backpacks they carried held a huge fortune, as they contained a lot of heavy gold. The couple neatly put them in a corner of the room, then climbed onto the bed to sleep. It felt so comfortable to be home. Thomas and Nancy looked at each other and smiled a satisfied smile. Soon, Thomas and Nancy would become the richest people in this area. Everyone they met would marvel at them. The couple would be admired by many. Suddenly, Thomas turned to Nancy and said, "Go to sleep. All the past is behind us. Tomorrow, my wife and I will go to the district to sell some gold, and while we're there, we'll see where on the street we should buy land, because in this village, you can't really do any business." Nancy looked at Thomas affectionately and nodded in agreement. Thomas didn't return that affectionate gaze, but looked up at the roof. Then both drifted off to sleep in their hometown house after 10 years of separation. The next morning, when Thomas and Nancy woke up, it was already past 9 a.m. They wearily stepped outside. Outside, a simple meal was already laid out, very humble, with only vegetable soup and salt. Looking at the meal, Thomas understood how difficult his parents' lives had been over the past years. While he was deep in thought, Linda rushed in from outside, saying as she walked, "You two are awake, come eat. The rice and soup are all from our own garden. I just went to the market at the village entrance to buy some food. Later, I'll invite Tim and Mary's family over for dinner to celebrate your return. Your father is probably sitting over there now." Thomas and Nancy looked at each other, no one spoke. After a moment of silence, Thomas said, "Later, my wife and I have some important business to attend to in the district town. As for the celebratory dinner, Mother, please postpone it until tomorrow night. We have some urgent matters to take care of. I'm afraid we won't have time today." Hearing Thomas, Linda immediately said, "Yes, the celebration can be any time, but you two just got back. Why are you rushing off already? Why don't you rest first?" "Yes, I have something important to do. I'll be back after I'm done, Mother," Thomas said. Then, Thomas and Nancy took Henry's bicycle and rode to the district town, not forgetting to bring their two backpacks. Thomas and Nancy went to the district town to sell gold, because they had ridden straight home without stopping on the way, so they hadn't had a chance to sell it yet. There were more than 10 gold, silver, and gemstone shops in the entire district town, and Thomas and Nancy visited them all. selling a little at each place to avoid drawing attention. After circling through all 10-plus gold shops, the amount of money in their backpacks was immense, and the gold in their backpacks had barely diminished. It was already past 5 p.m., and Thomas and Nancy rode back home. The bicycle was quite old, and pedaling it was already hard work, let alone carrying Nancy on the back with a heavy backpack. But Thomas still whistled cheerfully, his face beaming. Nancy, sitting behind, clutched the money-filled backpack, thinking that from now on, she would enjoy a life of comfort until the end of her days. As she was dreaming of a beautiful future, Thomas's question startled her. After the celebration tomorrow, my wife and I will go to the city to find and buy a beautiful house, then bring your parents and my parents to live in the city. Nancy whined playfully. You must remember that your wife's contribution is huge. You should be really proud to have a wife like me. Don't you dare flirt with anyone else, okay? I know how much my wife has sacrificed for this family, Thomas said gently, his expression changing slightly after Nancy finished speaking. Behind him, Nancy began to hum a cheerful tune, full of life. Nancy had every right to be happy. After years of struggling, they were now wealthy. On their way home, Thomas and Nancy stopped in front of a large general store in the district town, buying many delicious fruits, cakes, and sweets, even hiring a cyclo to carry the gifts to distribute to their neighbors. Thomas and Nancy bought many luxurious clothes. Seeing Thomas and Nancy like that, everyone in the village praised them, and they understood that Thomas and Nancy were now prosperous. The gifts Thomas gave were all expensive cakes. The clothes Thomas wore, some people couldn't afford even if they worked all year. Many even held Thomas and Nancy up as role models to learn from. People whispered to each other, Thomas and his wife are really capable. They had the ambition to leave their hometown and work hard at the border for 10 years. Now they've returned successful. This time, Henry and Linda will surely enjoy their old age. Many comments were made, mostly praises and admiration for Thomas and Nancy's resilience. That evening, when Thomas and Nancy rode their bicycle home, it was already past 7 p.m. It was a winter evening, and a light drizzle began to fall. The sky was pitch black. As the couple rode into the courtyard, Ink from the kitchen rushed out, barking loudly. Its barks were like piercing cries, very unpleasant. It seemed it still couldn't get used to the presence of its new owners. However, even after Thomas and Nancy had entered the house, the dog continued to bark long, eerie howls. Henry, annoyed, went outside and scolded. Ink, what are you barking so much about? I said stop. I'll sell you off. But when he stepped out the main door, Ink wasn't barking at Thomas and Nancy. It was staring straight out the gate towards the bamboo grove and howling. Its front paws scratched at the ground as if it wanted to leap out of the gate. Inside the house, Thomas heard Henry scold several times, but Ink's piercing barks wouldn't stop. Thomas called out, Why is Ink barking so much, father? Henry was standing in the yard, observing Ink. Hearing his son's voice, he was about to answer when Ink suddenly whimpered softly, tucked its tail, and ran straight into the kitchen as if afraid of something. Henry quickly walked into the house, speaking to Thomas. His face was a little tense, but he still tried to appear calm. It's probably just a cat or a mouse outside the bamboo grove. That's why it's barking. This dog has been acting strangely lately. Nancy, who had just brought the money into the room and came back out, was surprised to hear Henry and asked, Why is that, father? I thought it hadn't gotten used to our presence yet, so it was barking at us. Henry explained, I've raised Ink since it was a puppy for 10 years now. It's very smart and obedient. If I don't want it to bark at someone, I just need to hold it and put it in front of that person, and have that person stroke its head 3 times. From then on, it will never bark at them again. The other day, you two stroked its head 3 times, and didn't it wag its tail? Just now, when you two came back, I saw it barking very fiercely, so I ran out from the kitchen to see. When I got to the yard, I saw it was staring out at the gate and barking, not at you two. Thomas immediately said, That's right, father. When my wife and I came back, it was barking loudly, but it was indeed barking while running past us towards the gate. It was raining, so I didn't pay attention and just walked straight into the house. It's probably a mouse or a cat outside the bamboo grove that's irritating it, that's all. Nancy interjected, but ever since my husband and I came back, I've noticed Ink's barking sounds strange, father. It gives me goosebumps, like a dog barking at ghosts. As she spoke, Nancy suddenly shivered, and Thomas's face also tightened slightly. Noticing his daughter-in-law's frightened expression, Henry said nothing more and sighed. In truth, earlier, outside the gate, there was a detail Henry didn't tell Thomas and Nancy. That was, when Ink was aggressively barking, it suddenly whimpered and ran straight into the kitchen, and Henry caught sight of a pair of glowing red eyes behind the bamboo grove in front of their alley, staring straight towards their house. He jumped, about to cry out, but in a blink, the eyes vanished. Regaining his composure, he quickly walked back into the house. He didn't want his children to know about the strange occurrences around the land for the past week. A few days before Thomas and Nancy returned, he had felt a sense of unease. But since Thomas and Nancy came back, for these 2 nights, the incident of Ink howling around 3 a.m. no longer happened, and absolutely no owls perched on Tim's roof either. At dinner, Thomas took out a rather large wad of money and handed it to Henry, saying, "This is for you and Mother to spend. You've worked so hard all these years. Buy whatever you like to nourish yourselves and stay healthy. When it's gone, I'll give you more." Looking at the wad of money in Thomas's hand, Henry knew it was a very large sum. In all his life working for others, he had never saved such an amount. Linda was very surprised. She didn't know how her son had earned so much money. She trembled, emotionally saying, "You two worked for so many years to save a little money, and now you're giving it all to your parents. What will you use for your business? No, you keep it. Your parents are old, we don't eat or buy much, so we don't need such a large sum." Thomas took Henry's hand, placed the stack of money in his father's hand, and said, "Father, Mother, just take it and spend it freely. This money is nothing to my wife and me now." Hearing her son, Linda's eyes showed even more worry. She couldn't understand why, even though her son returned with a mountain of money, her heart felt strangely confused and uneasy. She stammered again, "You too. What kind of business are you in? How did you earn so much money?" Thomas's eyes showed a slight bewilderment. Understanding her mother-in-law's meaning that she was worried because of the vast amount of money, Nancy quickly chimed in. "Mother, don't worry. This is all money earned through my husband's and my hard work. For the past 10 years, we've been struggling with trade at the border. The first few years, we didn't have anything and we even lost money. But thinking about our family's difficult situation back home, we tried to persevere. In the following years, thanks to good fortune and our trustworthy business dealings, we gained customers' favor, so money just flowed into our pockets. That's how we got to where we are today. Mother, please take it and spend it freely. It will make us happy." Hearing her daughter-in-law's explanation, Linda felt a little more at ease, but for some unknown reason, her heart remained restless. The atmosphere at dinner became somewhat subdued. Suddenly, Henry asked, breaking the silence, "So, do you two have any plans now that you're back?" Thomas set his bowl down on the table and replied, "Yes, we plan to buy a house in the district town and bring you and Mother to live with us. What do you think?" Henry and Linda looked at each other, then Henry continued, "It's good that you children intend to live in the city. Your parents don't object. However, your parents have been attached to this land for a long time. We live here and will die here. We're not going anywhere. Besides, perhaps you two don't know that the state will be building a new interprovincial road right through our neighborhood. Because the old road was too dilapidated and winding, a decision was made for the new road to run straight past our front door. In just a few years, our land will become prime, valuable land. You children will surely be able to do business freely." Hearing Henry, both Thomas and Nancy were very surprised. Nancy asked again, "Father, where did you hear this, or is it just a rumor? Is it accurate, Father?" Henry sipped his tea and replied to his daughter-in-law, "What do you mean, accurate or not? Yesterday, officials from the province came down to work, planning to compensate the families with those large bamboo groves in front of their houses. The villagers have already accepted the compensation." So Henry's words were completely accurate. In a short time, when the interprovincial road runs past their front door, the land here will become an inch of gold. Nancy glanced at Thomas, and understanding his wife's meaning, Thomas winked back with a joyful expression. Thomas and Nancy, already rich, would become even richer. They would have had to spend a significant amount of money to buy land in the district town for business. Now, they wouldn't need to buy it, and soon, right on their own land, Thomas and Nancy would be able to do business freely. Thomas immediately said to his father, "If we can do business right here at home, there's no reason for us to go to the city. I'll stay and build a very large house, and it will also be convenient for my wife and me to take care of you and Mother." Nancy also quickly added, "I've always told my husband that our family doesn't lack money now. We have enough to eat and wear, so we should stay in our hometown to care for and look after our parents. My husband and I have been away working for so many years. You and father have suffered enough." Hearing her son's words, and especially Nancy's words, Henry and Linda felt warmed because they had such a filial daughter-in-law. Linda held her daughter-in-law's hand, trembling as she said, "Thomas is truly blessed to have married a wife like you. You're right to think that way. Your father and I are old and don't wish for anything anymore. Now that you two are back and settled, give us some grandchildren. Everyone else already has grown grandchildren." Henry immediately added, "That's right. You two should also think about having children. It's getting late. From tomorrow, I'll entrust this land to you two. Build whatever kind of house you want. Your mother and I just need a small room to live together until we return to our ancestors." Thomas and Nancy assented, then Thomas continued, "Actually, I don't think we need to build a house quickly. I plan to wait until they finish the road before we build. It won't be too late then, right? I'm still attached to some memories here, so I want to stay in this house to relive my childhood memories for a little longer." Hearing his son, Henry smiled and nodded. He thought it made sense. This house held so many family memories, and he couldn't bear to tear it down. Henry's eyes seemed nostalgic and contemplative when he suddenly heard Thomas ask, "Oh no, I've been so busy these past 2 days that I haven't been able to visit Tim and Mary's family to ask about their health. My wife and I will go visit them later. But why haven't they come over to visit? Usually, they used to stop by our house several times a day." Linda sighed and said, "Well, lately, I don't know what's wrong, but Tim's wife, Mary, has been sick constantly. Tim said she can't sleep, and she calls Ted's name all day long. Poor Holly must be sick from missing her son so much." Hearing this, Thomas was startled, and Nancy's face also turned pale as she hurriedly asked Linda, "Why is she missing her son? What happened to Ted and Holly, Mother?" Linda clicked her tongue and continued to recount. "Around the time you two left home for distant work, Ted also took Holly to the city for work. I heard that Holly hadn't even started working yet when Ted's workplace was raided by the police, and everyone from the boss to the employees was arrested. That incident sent shockwaves throughout our village. Everyone whispered that it was where Ted worked. But he must have caught wind of it beforehand, so he took his wife and disappeared without a trace. The police even came to our house to search for them, but ever since then, they've vanished and haven't returned." Thomas and Nancy exchanged glances, their eyes welling up with tears, looking very sad and heartbroken upon hearing the news about their friend whom they had played with since childhood, and who was even closer than a blood brother. Thomas looked out the door into the distance and spoke in a mournful tone, "You never know what life will bring. Years ago, I told him and Holly to leave that place and come do business with my wife and me, but they wouldn't listen, and that's why this happened. Who knows if they're even alive or dead now." Nancy looked at Thomas's face, her hand gripping her husband's shoulder. Nancy's face clearly showed paleness and exhaustion.